up to me and I'll give you the key. It's easy. Just keep on hopping, keep on rocking, and don't start stopping. Everything you need just to want to see. And if you want to make it right, you give it to me. I'll embrace it. I believe for you. You wouldn't believe what I see in you. So don't stop. Don't let the drip drop hop. Hold up and make it lovely, make it real, and make it yours. Don't stop.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. I'm super excited that you are here joining me. I'm sorry if I let you down. I know you may have noticed that I did miss an episode last Monday. I took a break. I was enjoying time with my family. My dad was visiting from Mexico. I haven't seen him in 3 years, almost 4 years. And so I had to take a little break. And that's one thing that I don't want this podcast to turn into, is something that's a burden or a stressor for me. And since I didn't have something recorded, and I also didn't have the time because I was enjoying time with my family, I decided to take a break for the first time in nearly 100 episodes. So I haven't missed a Monday, and I hated to break that streak, but I also value the time that I have with my family, and I don't want to get burned out with this podcast. So I decided that intermittently I may be missing a Monday here or there. And if it makes or breaks this show, then that is what it is, because I also need to keep my passion about this podcast and not have it turn into a chore. So I do it because I love it. I want to keep it that way. So I decided to take a little break, and I really thank you for your understanding. Today, I'm really excited because I have Dr. Gabrielle Lyon on the podcast. I've wanted her for a long time. We have many mutual friends. She is a Washington University fellowship trained physician in the nutritional science and geriatrics field. She is also board certified in family medicine and osteopathic manipulation. She also owns the Institute for Musclecentric Medicine. She talks a ton about why muscle is so important, why protein is so important, and it's just a really great conversation. So I think you guys are going to get a lot of value out of this conversation. Before we get going, I just want to share a couple of the things that I have been doing. I recently, as you know, have become friends with Rob Wolf. They are wonderful people, and they actually own the product LMNT, which is elemental magnesium, sodium, potassium electrolyte complex. I got hooked on their product because when I did the podcast with him, he sent me some of it, and I'm a huge fan of electrolytes. If you are one of my clients, you know that I spend a lot of time talking about how important electrolytes are. I often recommend them to my clients, and I started using their products, and let me tell you what, they are the bomb. So LMNT, I can give you a link, put it in the show notes, but high quality electrolytes, no sugars or artificial anything, and I am completely hooked on their products. So check them out, and the link is in the podcast notes. Also, leaving reviews. These are super important, and I know that so many people skip over this. They don't go and do it. These reviews are really important, guys. I am trying to get up there in reviews. It's helping this podcast grow, which is what I need in order to get quality guests on the show. And so if you can please pop on over, leave a review. I can't tell you how thankful I am for that. If you don't have Apple Podcasts or iTunes, please share me on social media, share me wherever you can, share with your friends and family, because it's really important that we get this information out there to start helping people. Okay, so that's my spiel. That's everything I had to say. I hope you enjoy this episode between me and Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. Dr. Lyon, I am so very excited to have you on the podcast. We have many mutual friends, and I know you're a busy lady, and so I'm finally getting to have you share some of your time with me. I'm very, very excited for it. How are you doing today?
I'm great. It's
Awesome.
busy, I made this joke. Have you ever seen that Taking Care of Babies, that online course?
Uh-uh.
So there's this course called Taking Care of Babies for all the parents out there, and it's Taking Care of Babies, Will I Ever Sleep Again? You know, because obviously I've had two babies in under 2 years. So I have decided I'm coming out with a new course because I'm taking care of a under 2 year old, a 4.5 month old, and a man child. And the new course is going to be Taking Care of Babies, Will I Sleep Again, Ever Sleep Again? It's going to be one module, and it's just going to be no.
Yes, that will be easy. That will be easy.
Done and
No
done.
content creation needed.
That's right. Like, here you go. I've solved it for you. I've put your mind at rest. The answer is no.
Well, I definitely think that you're a power player when it comes to this stuff because you have a lot going on. And
Mhm.
like you just said, you have the two young kiddos and a family and all of that stuff. So I totally get it. It's funny how we get so busy. And we as women, we tend to put more and more on our plate. And sometimes we have to be like, okay, no, it's okay to set a boundary here and
Yes.
not say yes sometimes, but we're
I don't think
typically
I've
the
actually
yesers.
said no. When I think about so basically I have a concierge medical practice, which is, I see patients 3 days a week, and then I do speaking. And I don't think that I have really almost ever said no, but I'm going to consider start doing that.
Yeah, I think we all need to set boundaries. It's super important. So I actually recently missed a Monday podcast for the first time in 100 episodes last week.
Wow.
And it was really crazy because I was like, no, I can't do this. And then I was like, no, I'm on vacation. My dad's
Right.
here from Mexico. Haven't seen him in 3 years. I'm
Amazing.
setting a boundary. It's okay.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
totally. Totally.
So you coined the phrase muscle centric medicine.
Mhm.
And so I'm hoping we can touch on a lot of what your philosophy is revolving around that and why it is so important today on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I founded the Institute for Muscle Centric Medicine. And this is the concept that skeletal muscle, is the largest organ in the body. And it's actually the organ of longevity. Typically, we think about muscle as it relates to locomotion and looking good naked, which, of course, all of those things are important. But skeletal muscle is actually so much more than that. It is the metabolic sink of the body. You hear about cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and people think that these are diseases of adipose tissue, but actually, these are diseases of skeletal muscle. Errors in skeletal muscle or pathology in skeletal muscle begins first. It is really the most underappreciated organ in the body. When you exercise, it contracts proteins called myokines, which actually hormonally. They act systemically. They go throughout the body. They affect the brain, the bone, the liver, the pancreas. They affect all cells in the body. So when we really think about skeletal muscle, we have to understand it that if we are coming from a preventative standpoint, which I believe that's where medicine is moving, it's no longer symptom-based approach, or I mean, for some people it is, but those are people that are never going to get better. For example, if you have elevated blood pressure, and this is not to say that elevated blood pressure shouldn't be treated medically if you have a family history, of course, but if you are looking for a solution and you are overweight and you have metabolic syndrome and you have all these other issues in terms of health and lifestyle, then taking a blood pressure medication is going to fix it, right? So that's symptomology based medicine. But if you address skeletal muscle, you can change multiple domains of health. It affects everything, the trajectory. It protects you from cardiovascular disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, all of these diseases. So, yes, that's what it is.
I love it. And I think that that's what people don't realize, right? Is how important carrying lean muscle mass really is. And I
Right.
think that especially women, they start to get scared when you talk about muscle. You hear it all the time. They're like, oh, well, I don't want to lift weights because I don't want to be bulky. That seems to be the common denominator with a lot of women. I just got it the other day when I was onboarding a client and I was like, whoa, hold on. Muscle is really super important for things far beyond aesthetics
Totally.
and movement.
And that's actually the afterthought. People really, if you want to age well, there's a couple things to think about. But number one, if you want to age well, your metabolism has to be in check. your ability to dispose of glucose, which glucose is cytotoxic to the cell, has to happen. 80+% of insulin related glucose disposal goes into the skeletal muscle, right? You have to get rid of this. When you are exercising, you now have another area to dispose of skeletal muscle. I mean, to dispose of glucose. Sorry, they're pounding on, hopefully you guys can't hear it, but now all of a sudden we've got a blind being put in, a blind.
Oh, perfect. No, that's how it always works. But yeah, so let's kind of dive into that just a little bit more, because I think there's a misnomer, and you also see, I guess, poor information spread about the need to eat. Like, you see people that go to the gym, for example, and they think that they need to load up on carbohydrates pre and post workout. And so I think that unfortunately people kind of get a bad message when it comes to that as well.
Always, always. And you bring up a really good point. When you think about skeletal muscle, you have to think about dietary protein. And what's so interesting is that the ability, so skeletal muscle is the largest nutrient sensing organ in the body. It actually senses protein. And when you age, that ability, that efficiency of being able to sense protein decreases, which is incredibly fascinating that this, you know, malleable tissue that is over 40% of our body weight is actually a nutrient sensing organ. And it's exquisitely sensitive to amino acids, which are protein. And that changes as we age. So a strategy, and you were talking about carbohydrates as it relates to pre and post training, but arguably more, you know, more importantly is to rebuild and, you know, really help the tissue repair itself. Number one is obviously time and rest, but the other aspect is dietary protein. Now, that's different than carbohydrates. Carbohydrates you would think about as muscle glycogen. The question then becomes, what is your goal? Are you trying to refill muscle glycogen stores, or are you trying to repair skeletal muscle? And arguably, most people are not working hard enough to be doing the, you know, robust pre and post carbohydrate intake. And, you know, I like to think about is that you have to earn your carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are a meal threshold item. For example, anything over 40 to 50 grams of carbohydrates per meal, you must earn through exercise. The current recommendation is looking like, if you look at the RDA, it's 130 grams for a day. Okay, I'm fine with that. But it's actually, when you look at dietary carbohydrates, carbohydrates should not be thought about in a 24-hour period. You need to understand that it's a threshold concept. So if you are going to have 130 grams of carbohydrates, you have to have it in discrete meals where you are not going over 40 grams of carbohydrates because of the way in which the body disposes of glucose, unless you are training. And I know it's like kind of sciencey, but the big thing are the take-home numbers. So understanding that no matter what you're hearing in the media, the science of glucose disposal is 40, max 50 grams, but it's really 40 grams if you're sedentary. That's it. So then you can say, well, if I'm going to do a smoothie or if I'm doing all these things, what is the max rate of disposal for a carbohydrate?
And I like that you kind of brought that up too, because many of these people that are spreading this information are people that maybe they do train extremely hard, but then they're forwarding this information to somebody that is just a general population person looking to start to get in shape. And their training levels are far different or beyond what the person that is giving this information on social media and stuff is saying. And then also, I mean, I would like to touch a little bit on the fact that our muscle tissue can only uptake so much glycogen before it's full and it's turning away that glucose. So, and that's where, you know, blood sugar and all of that comes into play. And people don't realize that that blood sugar needs to go somewhere.
Absolutely. This is a really great point. And we only actually have one way to deal with elevated blood sugar. The body only has one way, and that's to increase insulin. Whereas, for example, the body has multiple ways to deal with the low blood sugar, hypoglycemia. You can go through gluconeogenesis. You can have a release of catecholamines to liberate glucose. There are other ways, but you only have one way to deal with excess carbohydrates.
So can we dive into that just a little bit? What happens when our muscle glycogens and our liver glycogen is full?
Okay. This is a great question that you asked. So if you can't dispose of glucose, where does it go? So your muscle glycogen is full, your liver glycogen is full, it has to go back into the bloodstream. And the same actually goes, and when you think about the quality and the health of a skeletal muscle, you really want to deplete glycogen, right? You want to deplete glycogen so that you can refill it. What happens if you're sedentary and you have full muscle glycogen stores, when you're eating, the body can't, it can metabolize some of it, but it ends up going back into the bloodstream. And this is actually where I believe insulin resistance starts, because you have excess substrate and you have nowhere to put it. And that actually, depending on how into the science your listeners are, there was a period of time where people said, oh, well, branched chain amino acids cause diabetes, because they would see elevated levels of branched chain amino acids in the bloodstream. But the reality is no, you see elevated levels of branched chain amino acids in the bloodstream because, just like you said, the suitcase is full. It's got to go somewhere. So it goes back into the bloodstream. Same with free fatty acids.
So I love that we brought this up, because it's becoming more and more of a buzzword, especially in the health and fitness community, is insulin resistance. And can you tell us how maintaining more muscle mass helps us prevent insulin resistance?
Yes. So let's define insulin resistance. When we think about insulin resistance, it is really that the cells require, it is what it sounds like, require more insulin to move blood glucose into the cells, right? So you become resistant, you continue to produce insulin. When you have healthy skeletal muscle, you have to think of solution-based approaches. Skeletal muscle is the largest site for insulin stimulated glucose disposal. The healthier your skeletal muscle is, then you require less insulin. So number one, you can require less insulin if you have healthy skeletal muscle in which you are exercising. And number two, if you are sub-threshold these excess amounts of carbohydrates per meal, then you are not requiring a more robust insulin response. Let's talk about insulin for a second. So protein stimulates a phase 1 insulin response. What this means is that's preformed insulin in the pancreas. Because people may hear this, the more, definitely protein is the black sheep of the macronutrient family. Understanding some of the science behind it, rather than just saying, oh, well, protein increases insulin. Well, yeah, but not to the level that a carbohydrate would. And the reason that it does that is because it helps stimulate muscle protein synthesis. It all works in kind of conjunction in a positive. Whereas a robust amount of carbohydrates will produce a phase 1 and then a phase 2 insulin response, which is something that we would think about with insulin resistance, because your body is now having to create more insulin and cannot keep up.
So let's kind of now move into how this is important in building muscle, because some people think, we went back to that carbohydrate part where they think that they need tons of carbohydrates to build muscle. That's what bodybuilders do. Can you explain to us why it is important to actually, I feel like, err on the side of protein?
Yeah, well, when you think about building muscle, you need caloric excess, right? So you need enough substrates to build. You do need dietary protein. Number one, the most important thing is you've got to have consistent training. Volume, progressive overload, you really need to get that training dialed in. And then you need nutrients. So training is most important. And then of course you need nutrients to help, build muscle in hypertrophy. I think focusing on protein is important because number one, it provides the essential building blocks, and you need it, not just amino acids, you need the whole spectrum of protein. But your body can generate all the glucose it needs through carbohydrate or through protein, dietary protein. So for every 100 grams of dietary protein, your body will generate 60 grams of glucose. So you essentially can get it. It's of course a much slower process because you're going through gluconeogenesis. I also, going full disclosure, I don't feel like carbohydrates are the enemy or bad, right? I am not dogmatic in my approach. I am, of course, protein forward and higher protein. That is based on my personal bias and my training. I've trained professionally 7 years in nutritional sciences and have been trained by one of the world leading protein experts for 20 years, I am certainly focused on protein, but I am certainly open-minded that some individuals will, when they optimize for protein, will also want carbohydrates versus fats. So I think that's important to understand. There's a lot of, the carnivore, keto, and everyone kind of is back and forth with each other, but there is a certain amount of dietary flexibility that we're actually even starting to see in the science.
No, I love that totally. I'm one of those people that's absolutely not dogmatic about anything. I think it all has a tool and it can all be part of your toolkit. And if used properly, a tool is a great thing, but you definitely don't want to use a hammer to remove a nut, So
Right.
yeah. So I do think that there are some great things out there. So let's kind of talk about protein.
Yeah.
Most Americans, or people even in general in the world, are not getting enough. And unfortunately, our current dietary guidelines don't even help us get the amount of protein we need in order to thrive.
Yeah. Let's get real about this for 1 second. The current narrative that you are hearing right now is completely biased. It is like the mouse with the megaphone. Okay. This is really important to understand. You have movies like The Game Changers coming out. You have Hollywood going vegan. You have big pharma saying cholesterol is bad while you have 40 million people on statins. You have Quaker Oats supporting the American Heart Association and funding. The information that people are hearing is totally biased. If you were to believe the media, you would believe that if you lived in the US, that eating beef would be bad for the environment, right? Everybody's heard that. That's like, oh my God, everyone knows that. But if you actually looked at the EPA data from 2017, the Environmental Protection Agency, and, by the way, that's what we would consider in science pretty current data, 80% of greenhouse gas is coming from transportation, electricity, and industry. So if you really care about the environment and you live in Idaho, then maybe you shouldn't be eating avocados or mangoes, right? Because that's transportation. So people have to really understand that, if people are going to say, well, you shouldn't eat red meat because it's bad for the environment. Well, I mean, it's very hypocritical because I live in, New York, and I eat an avocado, but that's a much greater contributor to greenhouse gas, So we really have to think about the narrative that we're hearing, and it puts the false information first. And actually, we hear it from the top down, from the medical community. I'll give you an example. And don't get me started on this, but you already did. So here you go.
I love it. Let's go.
Somebody sent me a recent meta-analysis saying that red meat increases, I don't know, cardiovascular disease or something stupid. And then you look at the data, and this is meta-analysis. So meta-analysis takes a bunch of studies and it looks at the data, right? So these are considered to be, hopefully high quality studies, and then it looks at the data. And let's just say, in order for something to be statistically significant, meaning that it's relevant, that we believe what it's saying, that we, like if you smoke cigarettes and you look at your cancer risk, then the risk ratio would be 12, right? So that is considered really significant. And the baseline would be 2. So anything above 2 is, you're like, whoa, I need to pay attention to this. So this meta-analysis comes out, is the big headline is, red meat causes cancer, red meat contributes to coronary artery disease, all this stuff. And then you look at the relative risk and the risk ratio, and it's 1.1. So the headline says something, and the actual science in the paper is totally irrelevant and says something different.
Yeah. And I mean, not to mention all of the other things. And people can't even get me going on this one because I grew up in cattle ranching. I grew up in farming. I am in the deep heart of agriculture. I've been involved in all of this stuff. I've worked for cattle ranchers that have thousands of cattle. And let me tell you, from every standpoint, I can tell you this stuff that propaganda is feeding us is completely incorrect. And it definitely drives me absolutely crazy what they are trying to tell people about meat, and especially coming from a health standpoint. And that's even worse. Like, we are generating this sick population, and let's not factor in all of the other things that we are being exposed to that cause cancer, like the stuff in sunscreen and breast implants and K-cups. Like we
Or-
have thousands
Yep.
of people every year that are using these plastic things and putting heat through them. Yet we're worried about something that comes from nature that's real and whole.
Totally. Totally. I mean, it's just the narrative makes no sense. And this is one of the original superfoods, which is such a dumb term, but true. I mean, it is. And we have to understand that dietary protein, it's a privilege to say you don't want it. It's a privilege to say that you are not going to choose this nutrient dense, rich food, which has bioavailable iron and zinc and selenium. You're lucky, you know? And this whole push of go plant-based dietary protein, animal protein is different than plant protein. Well, yeah, it is. And frankly, animal-based proteins are healthier. They require a less amount. They've been around for a lot longer. We don't actually know what a pea isolate is going to do for the body in the long term. We just don't know. Takes more plant protein, it takes 6 cups of quinoa to equal 1 small chicken breast as it relates to the amino acids for skeletal muscle health. And this is not an argument, right? This is hard, fast biological data that plant protein has a lower amino acid content than animals. Like, that's it.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
still argue about it, which blows my mind. Do you know, I would love to stop talking about protein.
probably, but yeah, that's what you built your career on, right? So
I would love to stop talking about it, but I can't until, that there's some of this narrative is addressed. But I would love to stop talking about it. It's real annoying. Can you imagine being me? Still having to talk about this?
Well,
all the time, all day long.
And you're going to have to start talking about it more and more, the more and more people end up going the plant-based route, which a lot of people are misinformed there too, because they think that when they are, I literally, I asked on a questionnaire the other day, I was like, what are your favorite protein sources? And the person said peanut butter. And I was like, okay, we are misinformed when it comes to the availability of protein as well.
Yeah. So the bioavailability is what you're talking about. Food, there's nothing wrong with plant foods, but they have a fiber rich matrix, which becomes difficult to extract the amino acids from. But I'm going to tell you something that's going to blow your mind, because it blew my mind. I have always thought, and really everybody in science believes, that we cannot generate our own essential amino acids. Okay, and there's a paper that just came out in Nature that Dr. Donald Lehman, who is my mentor, my current mentor, been 20 years now, was a co-author on. And what they found, are you ready for this? That for a short period of time, and this is a rodent study, but for a short period of time, that individuals, or the group that was fed this certain amount of, like, it was equivalent to a vegan diet, started to generate, the gut microbiome started to generate essential amino acids.
Wow, that's very impressive.
Right? So that would, obviously these are not studies done in humans, but it is a proof of concept that perhaps some individuals for periods of time will do well, or are able to maintain their essential amino acid levels on a vegan or vegetarian diet. It'll be interesting to see. But overall, is that a good strategy? No. So anyone that has had any experience with an aging population will tell you that it is not a good strategy.
So what is an appropriate amount of protein? That seems to be the question for everyone, right? Everybody.
I think it's super easy. I think it's like super duper easy. It's 1 gram per pound ideal body weight. You can, depending on your age, you can go higher or lower, and that should be a baseline. You should make sure that, depending on what your strategy is, that you're getting 2 meals that are optimized for dietary protein, which really, again, depending on your age, puts you at between 30 grams and 50 grams of protein per meal. And then the rest of the calories are either carbohydrates or fats, depending on what you like. You don't have to go that high in protein. There is flexibility, but why not? It improves satiation. It has a lot of other mechanisms in the body. Arginine helps with vasodilation and nitric oxide, and glutamine helps with gut repair, and threonine helps with mucin production in the gut. There's all kinds of reasons why you would choose protein for the amino acid aspect, neurotransmitters versus excess fat or excess carbohydrates. But I think personal preference. Like for me, I do better on more carbohydrates than I would do on fat, you know?
So how about too much protein? Because we have,
We've never seen that, but we've never seen that study. Like we've never seen that too much protein affects bone or too much protein causes cancer. There's no negative studies. I think the biggest challenge would be keeping up with urea and ammonia and disposing of the nitrogen. But we've never seen that actually happen. We don't know what the upper limit of protein would be. We only can speculate.
yeah, and I was just curious about that because you hear a lot of the standard narrative saying that, okay, you're going to kill your kidneys and your liver off if you eat too much protein.
But that's old. So we now have other meta-analyses that have come out saying that actually protein improves glomerular filtration rate, which, that actually, those have already come out. And as it relates to bone, bone is made up of protein. It's quite simple.
Well, that's awesome. So as far as longevity goes, you did talk about that. I mean, aside from the standard health benefits that you get from having a certain amount of muscle, what are more ways that this helps you with longevity?
Well, at the end of, we talked about we touched on this earlier, is that when you think about the diseases of aging, and when I say diseases of aging, you might say Alzheimer's. Well, Alzheimer's, and there are different kinds of Alzheimer's, but arguably the one that we're seeing an increase in is the insulin resistance model, or vascular. Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes of the brain. If you want to protect your brain, you have to protect your metabolism. You have to be able to account for glucose ebbs and flows in the body. And the way in which you do that is clearly skeletal muscle. If you are concerned about cholesterol and you are concerned about fatty acids in the bloodstream, then you have to care about skeletal muscle because that is one of the primary sites. If you care about how you are going to age and you care about mobility, agility, you care about being able to withstand an injury or withstand an illness, then you must have skeletal muscle. And we know that the higher the amount of skeletal muscle, the lower morbidity and mortality. I mean, it determines everything about your metabolism, and the way in which you partition nutrients is key. I mean, that's it. And you have to start working on that in your 30s, right? You don't wait till you're, 60. I mean, you can, and you'll still put on muscle, but there are other biological factors that you are now up against. For example, you are up against a changing hormonal milieu. You are up against the anabolic resistance, which is the ability for the muscle to sense amino acids, primarily leucine. You have all of these hormonal challenges and metabolic challenges that now you are dealing with. It is more difficult to put on muscle as you age, even if you increase volume and you use progressive overload. And this is, I've worked with a lot of, I did a fellowship in geriatrics, obesity medicine and nutrition. And a 20-year-old who is driven by hormones is going to be able to put on exponentially more skeletal muscle. And they look different, right? You show me it is the exception to the rule of seeing an incredibly ripped 70-year-old. Not saying it can't happen, but it's the exception to the rule, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
obviously it's super important and it's very underrated as far as societal standards go. I mean, you're seeing so many people come in and they're like, I get people they're eating like 40. I mean, I even had a doctor telling someone to get 60 grams of protein the other day.
But they don't know. And this is actually something important, is you don't go to your physician for nutrition advice. And there's this big push saying, oh, physicians don't get nutrition training. They shouldn't. You're not going to them for nutrition advice. Why would your physician get nutrition training? If you want to see a physician who has been through nutrition training, then you go to a specialized physician. But it's interesting when I hear people always say, physician, they don't have they have 7 hours of nutrition. Well, I mean, they're diagnosticians. Why do you care that they have nutrition training or not?
Absolutely.
But that's interesting, right? Because everyone is you've heard that.
Yeah.
Haven't you heard that?
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
I want to
absolutely.
question that. Well, why? Why would you want your physician to have nutrition training? You're not there. You're there as a diagnostician.
Yep. And but you do see it a lot where they're giving information to people. And unfortunately, then I feel like people think that their physician knows everything and should know everything. And so they're even asking their physician for advice
Right.
that they're not able to give them correctly.
That's
and,
true. That part
and,
is true.
and so
It's not yeah, it's not their
yeah,
fault because they're getting misinformation from the top down, which is
absolutely.
interesting, which I was shocked to see. When you as a physician, I get updated emails and man, it is again, it pushes a narrative. It's very weird. It's very weird.
So, as far as finding a good provider goes, and I know this may not be your realm of things, but since we're there,
Yeah, let's talk about it.
what should a person look for in a physician as far as finding someone that they feel can address their needs
They should
properly?
be well trained. They should be well trained. I will give you an example. You wouldn't go to a dentist for gut health, would you? No. So you have to vet your physician. Is this an MD or DO? Number one. Where do they do their residency? Where do they do their fellowship? Are they really trained in nutrition or do they get a certification? Really asking these right questions. And, are they doing things on the up and up? You want someone who has a really good word of mouth reputation and really cares. You're not just a number, but you will know if your physician really cares.
Which I find interesting because there are so many people out there that truly do care, right? There are so many, I mean, there are no medical providers out there trying to harm you in any way, shape, or
I
form. And
agree.
I explain this to people all the time, but a lot of them are doing what they were taught and what they feel is right.
That's right.
And it makes it really hard to navigate in this society where we have insurance controlling things and a lot of other factors as in pharmaceutical companies and all of
Yeah.
these things. It makes it very, very hard to vet somebody and know if they're good because you have
No,
so
no, no,
many
no. You'll know. They've had
other
experience.
factors.
No, so I think that I think everybody should have two physicians on board. Should have a primary care internist. They did either family medicine or internal medicine, and they're your primary care doctor. And you know that they're a good diagnostician. You have a cold, they're going to listen to your lungs, they're going to do an x-ray, you're going to get the appropriate antibiotics. You have an abdominal mass, they're going to do ultrasound, they're going to do scan, they're going to check you out, right? Whatever that is, they're going to send you to the relevant specialist if you need to. You need that. Okay. Then you have more of an integrative functional medicine doctor that is going to talk to you about nutrition, that if you have gut health issues, if you have hormonal issues or any of these other things, then they are going to be your go-to for that. So, everyone, or, the best of both worlds is your integrative physician can do all that. Some integrative physicians do all that. So that's what you really want to think about when you are looking for a physician, but they should be well-trained. They should have experience and they should truly be transparent in saying, this is what I trained in and this is what I do.
I love that.
There's a lot of people practicing outside the scope of what they should be. And that I find, and I've talked to other physicians about it, that's not the right thing to do.
Yeah. I agree. It's and we're living in a world where it is hard to know what's right when there's so much information in front of us. I mean, you have Dr. Google, you've got social media, you have a million different opinions, and it just makes it hard and confusing oftentimes for people. So I think people need to definitely do their research. And also, I hate to say this, but I think bringing insurance and being like, well, this doctor's not covered by my insurance is not always what's going to be optimal for your health.
Right. And that's why you need two doctors. So for example, in my practice, it's interview based only. We will take a patient after they are vetted and interviewed, and we turn away patients all the time. And we don't take insurance, but often their primary care doctor does. And I think that you can find a great provider through insurance. And then if you have someone else on your team, which often you should, that doesn't take insurance, then, you know, you do your homework on them.
I love it.
But I think that I think solutions are there. I think totally solutions are there.
Good. And I think it's getting better too, honestly. Like you're seeing more and more people bringing in so much more knowledge and so much
Yep.
more looking for root cause, even in regular medical.
Slowly.
We'll
Maybe.
get there, hopefully.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they are, but good diagnosticians are essential. Really, they're amazing. You definitely need one on your team.
I love it. Well, thank you for that information.
Yeah.
So, as far as muscle-centric medicine goes,
Yep.
is there anything that we have missed that you really want to get out there to the world that is extremely important?
Yeah, protein, while incredibly controversial, is absolutely essential, and it's the macronutrient that you need to focus on. Your need for protein changes as you age. You actually need more, not less. And that is 30 to 50, 55 grams per meal. Muscle is so much more than just looking good naked. It is the organ of longevity, and it has multiple roles in the body, from producing myokines to being your metabolic sink, and understanding that the diseases of aging that we're seeing really come from diseases of skeletal muscle first. And that if you're focusing on adipose tissue, one of the reasons it's so hard to address it is because that's, you know, it's the wrong paradigm of thinking about it. And if you get the correct way of thinking about something, then the execution and ability to work within that realm to improve that situation happens exponentially. And yeah, that's what I think. And don't believe what you hear in the media.
That's a
biased, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I thank you so much for all of this. If my listeners want to go and find you, how do they do that?
They can find me on my website, Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. I have a newsletter that comes out every week. I have a YouTube channel where I talk a lot about these issues and these things with my mentor, and I'm going to start having other people on. Very active on Instagram. And yeah, that's it. Twitter.
Awesome. Well, I will make sure and put all that information in the show notes so that people can go and find you. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today.
You bet. Thanks so much.